And so I think actually there's a whole tradition in, well, it comes out of the Protestant Reformation. The Quakers, for example, were people who had enormous moral courage in
the abolition
opposing,
movement,
yes, slavery. They were pacifists when it's incredibly unfashionable to be pacifists. They pioneered social reform when no one else would do it. I think part of my own inspiration for trying to be part of a reform movement in science is actually the background of these Protestant movements.
You went through a period where you didn't want to be associated with the church and didn't want to go through confirmation and...
Oh yes, and I went through an atheist phase because that just came along with the scientific education. It seemed that it was a package deal, being a scientist and being an atheist. But I came to realize first that the kind of science I'd bought into and had been educated into, or even indoctrinated into, mechanistic materialism, was not a very good way of trying to understand living organisms. I was drawn to biology because I like animals and plants. And I found this machine theory of life was a very inadequate way of seeing animals, plants, and other forms of life. So I began to question that first.
Even as a secondary school student?
I think I began to question it after I left school. I certainly did as an undergraduate.
At Cambridge?
At Cambridge. So that made me feel there was something terribly wrong with science. But it took me a long time, another 10 years really, before I began to think that the atheist worldview was much too limited. And at first I was drawn to Indian traditions, transcendental meditation.
You worked in India?
Yoga. I worked in India. So I was very influenced by the Indian approach, Indian philosophy, which provided an alternative to Western philosophy that I found more attractive. But then through being in India for several years, and I was there for 7 years altogether, I was drawn back to a Christian path, and I'm now a practicing Anglican, a member of the Church of England, partly because this is the path that feels most natural. I mean, the Methodist Church and the Anglican Church, I was brought up in both. I went to an Anglican school. Connect with my own roots, and I find that a healing process. And I think it's better to connect with one's own tradition than not to connect with it if it's possible to do that. I think it's also important to learn from all other traditions. I mean, my own practices are very influenced by the Hindu tradition, to some extent Buddhism, some extent Sufism, and some extent shamanism in various parts of the world. And my two most recent books, which are called Pseudoscience and Spiritual Practices and Ways to Go Beyond and Why They Work, are about a combination of science and spiritual practice. Spiritual practice is about experience, and I think that all religions are rooted in experience primarily. Buddha didn't become enlightened through doing a Ph.D. He became enlightened through sitting under trees meditating. And Jesus didn't become a religious leader through going to a rabbinical seminary. It was through deep mystical experiences.
Another plane. Busy airport.
So, I think that, in my own case, I was fortunate in that when I got interested in pursuing a non-conventional path in science, at that time I was not married and I didn't have children. I think if I'd got married early and if I'd had children, I might not have been able to do it, because it's extremely insecure to strike out outside the regular jobs of academic life and so on. And I'm pretty sure if I'd got married early and had children, I would have had a wife who would have said, probably rightly, you know, this is irresponsible, think of the children, you can't do this, where's the money going to come from, you know, how will you repay for the kids and their education and all that kind of thing. I was able to do this before that happened. I got married late, and I'm married to a woman who is interested in these same kind of things. So I can't advocate this particular kind of career path for anybody else, but in my own case, it's what I was drawn to and what I've tried to follow and what I still follow.
And your birth order, I'm asking because one sociological study found that what they called rebel scientists were later born. My particular group was firstborn. What about you?
I'm firstborn.
Yeah, it makes sense to me because firstborns are expected to be achievers and have confidence and that kind of thing. You're a Cancer. Does that mean anything to you in your astrological type?
Not a lot. I don't pay much attention to astrology. It's not that I'm against it, it's just that I'm not very interested in it, and there's a limit to how many things one can take an interest in. My wife's very keen on astrology, so you know, she tells me the results of reading charts and that sort of thing. But I've never been terribly interested in it myself, partly because it seems to me too mechanical. I mean, astrologers do it from computer programs, and I found that if you actually ask astrologers, you know, where's Mars tonight in the sky, they actually often don't know because they don't look at the sky. I'm interested in the sky, the stars and the planets, and astrology seems to me too academic and too book and computer based. Observational astronomy connects us with the sky, but the astronomers don't see any meaning in it, and the astrologers see meaning, but they don't actually look at the sky. So I'd love to see a combination of the two, then I'd get much more interested.
Do you think in the face of global warming and, as I say, the rise of autocrats and all the disasters we're experiencing, are you an optimist or a pessimist in terms of your understanding of the field?
Oh, well, I'm an optimist, really, but I mean, that may just be me rather than a reading of the situation. But I always hope that things can get better, and I think that hoping and praying that things can get better is actually part of creating the conditions for them to get better. If we despair and say, oh, it can only get worse, it's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy.
Absolutely. Is there anything else that you would like people to think about in terms of the new, which is really the old paradigm of science and what it takes to be an independent thinker?
Well, I think the most important thing is to realize that current contemporary materialist science is based on a belief system. It's not the truth. And a lot of people are educated into a way of thinking this is the truth. Other people have belief systems, religious people, superstitious people, astrologers, homeopaths, and so on. They've all got belief systems, but science is true. It isn't. It's a belief system, and it's an exceptionally dogmatic one, and it's an exceptionally limiting one. And so I think it's very important to liberate ourselves from this cultural sort of hypnotic state that we're in about this being the only true way of looking at the world. It has value. Many of the things that science has discovered are really important. So what I'm not saying that everything about existing science is wrong. What I'm saying is the assumptions on which it's based are too limited, and we need a bigger framework and a more inclusive kind of science. We need to sort of grow out of this limited kind we've got at the moment. Not reject it and say it's totally wrong. It isn't. But we need to move on and to grow up really scientifically. So I think when we see that it doesn't involve denying science, in fact, I'm a practicing scientist, I spend much of my time doing research. I'm totally in favor of science as a method, but not as a belief system. And I think when we see it as a method, and when we see that we can grow up and science can expand, it can no longer need be hostile to religion or spirituality, that medicine can expand to include traditional medical systems from different parts of the world, alternative medical systems, doesn't have to have a dogmatic adherence to just one kind. Then we'll have a more satisfying world, and one that's better in accordance with reality and healthier to live in.
What's interesting is it's not just academia, it's also Wikipedia and TED Talk censor what they consider pseudoscience. So it comes from all kinds of direction, this limiting viewpoint.
Well, it's a dominant paradigm affects people not only within institutional science, but people who've been through the university system, which inculcates those ideas into lots of people who are not practicing scientists. So it spills over into the media, in politics, in Wikipedia, in the educational system.
It becomes a dogma, a superstition, a prejudice. Yeah.
Yeah. But you know, the humans have always had sort of periods of dogmatism of one kind or another. We're in one now. The difference is that most people today think that they've risen above dogma and we've been uniquely liberated from it. But in fact, that's it's a terrible illusion. Most people who are religious realize there are lots of different religions. There's pluralism in religion: Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, Christians, etc. And within each religion, there's a whole range of different kinds. Presbyterians, Quakers, Catholics, Greek Orthodox, and so on. So anyone who belongs to any of these religions or denominations knows that there are other religious views, whereas in science there's only one kind, and most people think that's the one true kind. And I think what we need is much more pluralism in science, because